On today's show, we are going to dive into the reported head coaching candidates for the Cleveland Cavaliers with prior head coaching experience in the NBA. I'll help you decide myself who is the best fit for Donovan Mitchell and the Cleveland Cavaliers.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Cavs. How you doing? Come on in and sit on down because, folks, it is Tuesday. Tuesday, as our British listeners may say. But Kobe Altman did say that he and his staff would take the entirety of Memorial Day weekend out of respect for JB Bickerstaff, since he coached the Cavs for half a decade, and just kind of deal with the emotional hangover and fallout of letting Bickerstaff go and relieving him of head coaching responsibilities. And that the Cavs, and through Altman and his staff, would begin the head coaching search on Tuesday. And although Altman said that there are no hard lists out there, there are no actual fundamental proof that the Cavs have any coaches linked to them. That doesn't seem to be the case. Since the moment the Cavs season ended, since the moment JB Bickerstaff was let go, it appears that a lot of names have popped up in the ether for the Cavs. A name that Jason Lloyd of The Athletic has shared over the weekend, a name that Mark Stein via Substack shared over the weekend, and something Evan Dammarell shared via Down Euclid right when the season ended. So subscribe and support Down Euclid because we get that stuff faster than anyone else. Shared that Kenny Atkinson, former Brooklyn Nets head coach and current Golden State Warriors lead assistant coach, is the odds-on favorite and a likely candidate to get some serious and strong consideration for the next head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And later this week, I'll be having Adam Armbrecht on from Locked On Nets to talk about Atkinson's time with Brooklyn. Some interesting stuff that Atkinson had to deal with in that era of Nets basketball. We'll be talking with some guys from Clips and Dips, two good friends of mine, including Chuck Mockler, who has been on the show before, to talk about and discuss Atkinson as, an associate head coach for the LA Clippers. But just looking overall, let's just, give a brief resume breakdown of Kenny Atkinson. We'll also be talking about some other head coaching candidates today, but let's start with Atkinson, a coach that has had some prior NBA coaching experience. He was the guy who took over once the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Deron Williams, Brooke Lopez era Nets came to a close as they tore that mamma jamma down, and Atkinson helped kind of develop and lead the charge with two familiar Cavs you may know in like Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, but then was eventually a casualty of the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant Brooklyn Nets because he, as in Atkinson, refused to start DeAndre Jordan over Allen, which, funnily enough, was kind of a parallel when James Harden ended up in Brooklyn and Jared Allen ended up in Cleveland, where Allen backed up Andre Drummond. Had a tweet that go viral about the Rick and Morty clip about Morty knowing true flatness, and that's kind of what life was like when Andre Drummond is out and Jared Allen started, and Jared Allen got re-relegated to the bench. But focusing on Atkinson in Brooklyn, he went 118 and 190 in those 3 years of the Nets, including going 42 and 40 and reaching the playoffs in the 2018-19 season. For clarity, he did almost accept another head coaching position 2 years ago with the Hornets, and not too long after, before changing his mind, he remained with the Warriors for a second season. And after parting with the Nets, to give you a timeline of where he's been, he spent a year on the LA Clippers coaching staff during the 2019-2020 season. And just a brief overview of how Atkinson operates. His offense relies heavily on passing, three-point shooting, and playing at a faster rate overall, which, if you paid attention to the Cavs over this last season, that was when they were at their best, when they were moving the ball quickly, they were executing quickly, they weren't hesitating on their shots or their attempts. And I think it is something that really could jive and gel with this Cavs team, especially if they don't follow through on the commitment Kobe Altman made that there's not a lot of large wholesale change coming towards Cleveland roster-wise. Like, let's say Darius Garland heads out because he's a guard that plays at a slower pace, whereas Mitchell plays faster, and they somehow find a guard that can play at a bit of a faster, giddy-up pace that Atkinson likes to do, and kind of just get more shots up as quickly as possible, and also efficient shots as well. Um, he also does bring a solid defensive principles and concepts to the table. He is in that Greg Popovichian tree. Taking and for context, he took the Nets from the worst defensive team in the league in the year prior he arrived to being the eighth best team defensively in his first season at the helm. So it's not just all shots. It's not like an inverse of JB Bickerstaff where it's all offense with not a really an inspired defense playing out there. Instead, it's some pretty solid basketball, I'd say. And I think just like looking at it, and it makes sense why Atkinson is the odds-on favorite to be the Cavs' next head coach. I think that's something that I've kind of gotten general vibe wise across the league is he's not going to do what he did with the Hornets last time, where he accepts the position and then pivots away from it, and it causes the Hornets to scramble. And instead, he likely is a coach that is looking to coach a team where maybe he has a lot of input. I mean, the Hornets were a bit in flux at the time. Michael Jordan was trying to sell the team, and also the Hornets are just like an incredibly toxic environment in general, I think. God help Brandon Miller, but if they can get LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges away from him, I think that team has something going for them. But more importantly, I think he's just looking to coach more of a winner, not deal with another rebuild. Because he has had tastes with success. He is coaching with the Golden State Warriors. He has been heavily involved with kind of scheming up and planning their offense a little bit. I mean, obviously, a lot of it is the basketball socialism that Steve Kerr employs, but like Atkinson is doing a good job trying to maximize and try and find opportunities for role players, whether it is Moses Moody or just even like trying to blend in with like Steph Curry or Kevon Looney or Jonathan Kuminga. Like Atkinson has been a key figure in that, and also just like he did develop Jared Allen into the player he was. He went very low in the draft. Was kind of considered not super passionate about basketball coming out of Texas, but Atkinson tapped into him, made him into a defensive monster, and I think that's why the Cavs are so high on his upside after seeing him flourish and develop under Atkinson's tutelage. And Karis LeVert's a guy who's a diamond in the rough a little bit. I think a little bit unremarkable coming out of Michigan, and Atkinson showed off a lot of his, as in LeVert's playmaking chops through a lot of this like heavy spray and pray, pick and roll, kind of just oriented offense. And I think if you were to bring in a coach with experience, sure, he's a guy who doesn't have a winning overall record. He only has 3-ish years of experience coaching as a head coach overall, but he has a wealth of experience coaching just as an assistant. I think he's just seen a lot of opportunities and just a lot of just different situations. I mean, let's just break down his resume overall. Like, he has a NBA title to his name. He excuse me, coached Paris Basket Racing from 04 to 06. He's an assistant with the Knicks from 2008 to 2012. Excuse me, was I guess technically under the Popovichian tree because he was coaching with Mike Budenholzer at the time, but he was an assistant with the Atlanta Hawks from 2012 to 2016. Obviously coached the Nets for those 3-ish years, and then has been an assistant with the Clippers and the Warriors since, and won a championship in 2012, and was considered kind of vital to coaching Golden State through that stretch and just kind of being like an offensive conduit for the Warriors. And I think that's just valuable wealth of experience. Like, he knows what it takes to make offensive adjustments when they matter. His system is pretty fundamentally sound. It's not super play heavy. It's just, schematically set in stone. I think there's a lot of freedom and creativity for guys like Donovan Mitchell and others to thrive. And if you're the Cavs, like, that is a pleasant thing. And he was kind of a part of like Brook Lopez developing a bit of a 3-point shot too. It didn't really come to fruition until Lopez joined Milwaukee, of course, and but still, like, I think Atkinson could be a solid pick for the Cavs. I am curious to see how far the interviews go, or if he really wants to leave greener pastures in Golden State, because he has a pretty nice gig there where, sure, the Warriors are a bit of a dying star right now, but maybe he could take over for Steve Kerr whenever Steve Kerr retires as well, and just deal with, continuity and living in the Bay Area as well. But I think Kenny Atkinson makes a lot of sense for the Cleveland Cavaliers, but you know what makes a lot of sense for everybody else here? Here are these words from today's first sponsor and only sponsor today, FanDuel. As I had mentioned before as we went into break, today's episode of Locked on Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all in time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So, if you're feeling good about the Boston Celtics or the Dallas Mavericks winning it all, which can't believe the Wolves are blowing it, but alas, you can win big too with any $5 winning bet, resulting in $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. That's 150 bones, which, if you can't do the math, is 30 times more than the money you wagered in the first place. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count for you and win big. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. What's up? We are back. Welcome back to Locked On Cavs. And I have to ask you, since we are the #1 podcast covering all things Cleveland Cavaliers, and you're getting your fill of me on my own talking about head coaching candidates for the Cleveland Cavaliers, which we will be touching on Terry Stotts in a second. I just got to ask, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that darn shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed for your everyday to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which, again, folks, features your team every single day, including the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Browns, the Guards, Blue Jackets, Buckeyes. Gosh, it's an Ohio smorgasbord. The Broncos, for me, love it all. Let's ride. But moving on from Kenny Atkinson, who I think makes a lot of sense for the Cleveland Cavaliers, Mark Stein did include this interesting nugget in his latest newsletter, which reads as follows. It is unclear if the Cavaliers are keeping Darius Garland on the roster this offseason. Still, league sources say that the prospect of hiring Trailblazers coach Terry Stotts is among the scenarios Cleveland has contemplated in the initial stages of its supposed coaching search. Stein reiterates that former Nets head coach Kenny Atkinson is widely considered the early favorite. Still, the list of coaching candidates to replace JB Bickerstaff is said to include James Borrego, Terry Stotts, former Cavaliers coaching consultant Dave Yeager, who we will touch on in a bit, and Knicks associate head coach Johnny Bryant, who is close with Cavaliers star Donovan Mitchell from their time together in Utah, which, folks, quick self-promotion for myself. The moment the season ended, I had mentioned James Borrego, Johnny Bryant, and Kenny Atkinson. Mostly Johnny Bryant because of the connection with the New York Knicks and everything as well. So, check out right Down Euclid to get that info first. But Stein continues. The thinking on Stotts, Mitchell and Garland resemble the Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum pairing as a backcourt who were coached by Stotts as Portland for a duo for 8 seasons. So when it comes to Terry Stotts, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So over those 8 seasons, the Blazers did make a fairly improbable Western Conference Finals run. I think it was a fluke. Maybe it was because the final season of Game of Thrones, which was airing at the time, was abhorrently terrible, but the Blazers scrapped and clawed, got past a then up-and-coming Nikola Jokic and Denver Nuggets team to then just get grinded by the Golden State Warriors, who then were ground to dust by the Kawhi Leonard-led Toronto Raptors. Injuries did play a part in that Warriors dynasty coming to an end, but I think Stotts would be an interesting choice just because he does have a ton of experience. He has been before and overall the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Portland Trail Blazers, and has an overall record of 5-17 and 486. I've done just a lot of research on him, and you can say his system in Portland and just overall vibe is synergy, freedom, and cooperation. This coalescence of his instincts for offense and also plays a part in defense. And Stotts is a guy that knows what his players can give him and creates opportunities for them to contribute. And I think, of course, a lot of that starts and ends with the fact that, if the Cavs don't honor Darius Garland's initial trade request, if they say, you know what, Rich, Clutch, Darius, Donovan is here for the foreseeable future. We're not getting the returns we're looking for when it comes to just what we can possibly as in the Cavs can get for Darius out there. And if you have a guy like Stotts who is comfortable scheming up an offense around 2 small ball dominant guards and make them thrive in tandem, with obviously I think Lillard clearly being the alpha in that situation and McCollum being a very, very, very high-end supporting backcourt partner. So you'd see the parallels with like Mitchell, who is coached by Johnny Bryan, who also Bryan also coached Damian Lillard in the offseason, and also Garland playing more of that McCollum role as a primary maybe ball handler, secondary shot creator, a guy who has to play second fiddle to Mitchell. And if you have a guy who can clearly establish the pecking order, which is something I don't think the Cavs really had in terms of continuity on offense, that could help a lot, and maybe also mend benches and fix the issue that Garland maybe has playing alongside Mitchell, and maybe just maybe some of the just overall kinks instead of the your turn my turn offense. But overall, similar to Atkinson, it's a lot of 3-point shooting, movement, and passing. I think the Blazers don't play at maybe as fast of a pace as Atkinson's Nets teams did. But like Atkinson, Stotts also has a ton of assistant coaching experience, and one of his more interesting stops was in Dallas with the Mavericks when the Mavericks won their title back in 2011. But he was known for building a system conducive to Dirk Nowitzki shooting, and if you're an Evan Mobley truther when it comes to the 3-point shooting, especially if the Cavs really do run this whole mamma jamma back and they keep Jared Allen and Evan Mobley out there as well, if Stotts is able to build a system where they find Evan Mobley cleaner shots on the perimeter, they find him cleaner opportunities just to make an impact from the perimeter and kind of maybe deal with some of the spacing issues that exist with a pair of Mobley and Allen, I think that's a way to look at it. Just the issues is, and okay, another positive before we dive in the issues. Terry Stotts' system, again, it's a lot on synergy, freedom, and cooperation, but like his team seldom takes bad shots. Towards the end of his time, 3-point shooting at first was rotation wide, just not on the shoulder of the guards in Lillard and McCollum. But as things got thinner in Portland, as the Blazers kept trying to make a championship caliber team around Dame and eventually CJ, who they jettisoned to the Pelicans eventually, the things got thinner and thinner, and it just kind of got more isolation heavy and heavier on Damian Lillard, which just made you see Dame put up like these obscene numbers under Stotts. And I think, again, that system works, but they aren't bad shots. They aren't contested. They aren't sloppy. They are a product of the offense and the movement. I think there is some merit to that possibly being a thing, or if you're looking from the avenue of Stotts leaving his situation currently, and moving on to Cleveland, let's say, like, hypothetically speaking, like Terry Stotts, who isn't doing anything right now, he last coached the Milwaukee Bucks in 2023 under Mike Budenholzer, which he resigned from he wasn't under Mike Budenholzer. That was Adrian Griffin, when they got in a fight during practice, and then he resigned because of the issues, and then Griffin was fired. So maybe Stotts saw something, but Stotts is comfortable being an assistant coach, maybe a lead assistant coach, and if he's comfortable supporting a first-time coach, let's say it's like a Johnny Bryant or a guy that I reported as Alex Jensen, who could help a lot with big man development, or maybe like James Borrego, who is a little bit of a flawed candidate. Maybe there's a way they could really gear up the offense where Stotts is doing things on offense, and they let a first-time coach handle the charge as well. But again, like his offense is very, very precise, and more than anything, like, there's some Bickerstaffian vibes, where the fact that like Terry Stotts is just, he good feelings and good spirits became the norm in Portland, win or lose. He never threw players or coaches under the bus. He carried the brunt of the responsibility when there were issues for losses, and deflect praise constantly and rather heap it on players or, the front office putting these players in place for him to coach, just because that's kind of how it works. And I think if you have a positive approach to it, and firm optimism on everything, I think it just makes a lot of tough situations easier to tackle. But yeah, we'll see. I think Stotts, in terms of just like ranking, I think he'd be a distant 2 to Atkinson of the 2 candidates we've discussed so far. Again, I think he'd be better utilized as like a lead assistant, similar to the role that Atkinson is in Golden State behind Steve Kerr, especially if the Cavs strike out on Kenny Atkinson. But like Terry Stotts could scheme up a really good offense for the Cavs. Maybe make the Bucks really regret their decision of not mediating the dispute between AJ Griffin, who was screaming at Stotts and kind of try to make an example out of him in front of the team, according to reports by The Athletic, and just what they're doing now. But I'm not super thrilled about it, but it is an interesting name to kind of keep an eye on, especially if the Cavs are a little hell-bent and determined to run this back as much as they can, especially with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen together, in terms of just like stretching things out with Evan Mobley on the perimeter and Allen just being the big man in the paint, or between Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. But yeah, it's worth keeping an eye on. It's worth, I think, just kind of monitoring as things go forward. But a distant second place right now. And the guy who I think could kind of be in that mix too, maybe he becomes an assistant as well, but could make sense as a head coach for the Cavs, is a name that folks might be all too familiar with in Dave Yeager, which we'll talk about in a second. As I had mentioned before, I'm Evan Dammarell, by the way, host of Locked On Cavs. Still weird to say. Dave Yeager is a candidate who Mark Stein mentioned. I think makes sense just because he was a guy that has a relationship with Kobe Altman to begin with. But for those who don't remember, Dave Yeager was brought in as a coaching consultant who more or less like worked with Bickerstaff both in person and virtually, just kind of like fine tuning and correcting some of the mistakes when it comes to like offense or maybe some defensive stuff, and just like an extra set of eyes, just to advise the coaching staff on like priorities and development and things like that. I'm kind of, speaking it into existence. We don't have a clear understanding of what his full role was at Cleveland, but obviously is there to kind of like maybe mentor and keep an eye on Bickerstaff, who's still a pretty young coach despite his wealth of experience as an assistant and a head coach. And also could have been like a little bit of a message from whether it's the front office or the organization for Bickerstaff to coach his tail off, which he certainly did in mid-December, just because like they have Dave Yeager on the sidelines who has been monitoring the situation, kind of keeping tabs on things, giving his input to the front office and the coaching staff, and I don't want to say worm tonguing the situation, but at least being a soothsayer and talking about things. And if Bickerstaff didn't work out, Dave Yeager could have very well been the replacement head coach for the Cavs last season, and maybe he is Bickerstaff's ultimate replacement now, just months later. But for an overall overview, Yeager was the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies from 2013 to 2016, and with the Sacramento Kings from 2016 to 2019. He was also on Milwaukee's 2021 championship team, and he left the Cavs midseason to become an assistant under Doc Rivers in Milwaukee, a role he served last season with the Philadelphia 76ers, and he owns an overall record of 245 and 247, which those Kings teams were kind of wishy-washy and a little bit hard. So it's kind of hard to fully evaluate it. But in Memphis, Yeager continued Lionel Holland's established identity of grit and grind, which, was led by Tony Allen, Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, Mike Conley, like everyone and everywhere in between. And like, it was a lot of like high defense, which, gives you a lot of vibes. And it could very much be if, like, let's say Yeager becomes the head coach and Yeager decides to lean on defense over offense. It could be similar to what JB Bickerstaff was like at head coach, which doesn't really draw inspiration. But on the inverse of things, in Sacramento, he built the offense entirely around DeMarcus Cousins, and the focus was on three-point shooting, pace, and space, which allowed Cousins to thrive. I think would make sense just because like Cousins was an interesting big man where he would shoot threes and also just was a defensive monster, rebounding threat, and just like a dominant force on the interior. If you want to kind of like build an offense around Evan Mobley, maybe Yeager's approach and guidance can make a lot of sense there. This makes sense if you maybe move on from Jared Allen and keep Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell together. Maybe Yeager can kind of key some pieces there together too. But the bigger red flag with Dave Yeager, who again hasn't coached since 2019, so it's been almost half a decade since he last was at the helm of an NBA team, is the offense was there in Sacramento, but the defense he coached up in Memphis did not follow. Whereas in Memphis, the defense was there, and I think it's a lot of continuation of what Lionel Hollins established and built there. And continued down the line as well, besides like David Fizdale fizzing out and JB Bickerstaff kind of being the casualty of coaching for his life in Memphis after Fizdale. Yeager coached the heck out of that defense. Again, it was the grit and grind era. He maintained that status quo where the Grizzlies are just going to beat you to death and win like 83-80 in the playoffs. And Clippers Grizzlies is must-see TV during the postseason. But I just think, also just like the offense didn't translate like it did to Sacramento. So it's like two lanes. Like, do you get the offensive Yeager or do you get the defensive Yeager? And I don't think if you're the Cavs, you really want to have a guy who coaches up one way versus another, and maybe just isn't fit for the role. Like he does and has been reported to been a bit of a thorn in the side of some players and of mostly like front office staff and stuff. But again, he does have like a established relationship with Kobe Altman. He does have a bit of a rapport with the Cavs in general. He probably has a relationship with some of the players. And if I had to just continue to keep talking about this and just in terms of guys that have had experience, like we didn't touch on James Borrego in this show, who I think would be my number one choice if you had to pick Cavs coaching candidates with prior head coaching experience, and I'll give a quick rundown on it. James Borrego just makes a lot of sense because like he's a guy who can squeeze blood out of a stone on offense with the defensive acumen still there. I think he's a very smart, intelligent player. The fact that he took the Pelicans as his current role as their lead associate head coach from 22nd in offensive rating to top 10 in just a season is incredible. I think the fact that he can make the Hornets, who have never had a big man, a solid defensive team, and try to eat every bite of a turd sandwich between LaMelo Ball, who is toxic and runs over fans' foots, and Miles Bridges, who should not be playing basketball at all, and turn that into a top 10 offense every single season, or had the best offense in the league with Isaiah Thomas, who was signed off a 10-day deal, or 33-year-old Ish Smith running point for them. Like, there's a lot of juice there. So I think Borrego, like, I didn't touch on him, but like we talked about him before. I've talked about him before, so I wanted to give some shine to Atkinson, Stotts, and Jaeger. But I would go Borrego as like a firm first. I'd go Atkinson as the runner-up, and then distance pretty far back from Atkinson is Terry Stotts, and at the absolute bottom of this list is Dave Jaeger, just because I just don't think Jaeger is a good head coach. I think he's a better assistant coach. Like, I think he's a guy, if you give him minimal tasks and not full autonomy, he can be very useful in that, whether it's offense or defense or just big man coaching in general, because he built an offensive system around Boogie Cousins, which was pretty successful until Boogie got shipped to the Pelicans and played with Anthony Davis. What a weird time. But that'll do it for today. Again, I will be back tomorrow to talk more about Kenny Atkinson with Adam Armbrecht. I'll be joined by Doug Branson to eventually talk about James Borrego as well. We'll be talking more about Kenny Atkinson with some of my friends that cover the Clippers. Just going through a lot of these coaching candidates and hires. We'll be doing a bit more of an NBA draft deep dive as it turns to June. I'll be joined by some draft analysts and experts, because I'll be frank, I'm an Akron Zips alumni, and I doubt the Cavs are picking anyone on Akron with their 20th overall pick, so we should dive into some of the players and kind of figure out what the Cavs should do there. But until next time, I hope you guys had a great Memorial Day weekend. I am Evan Dammarell. Check out my work at Down Euclid, where a lot of this coaching stuff came out first before a lot of the bigger NBA insiders and names kind of reported it. And just stay tuned. The Cleveland Cavaliers are an interesting crossroad, but they should be making a decision on their head coach soon enough. Until then, bye-bye.